It has been a while since we've done a video directly about playing the Star Wars role-playing game from Fantasy Flight Games. And recently I've been involved in discussions with other players of the game about obligation and duty. And so it's really time to do one of these again. All right. Some might be thinking, well, why not also include morality? And that's simply because of length and the things I want to say about morality and its uses in the game. While there'll be some overlap with obligation and duty, I just want to keep those things separate. So there'll be another video along about that. Obligation and duty have a lot of similarities in where they reside in the game. On the surface, these two things, obligation and duty, may seem to be the same thing, or they may seem to be something that you can easily dispense with, especially if you're going to be doing something like just playing a one-shot. What I hope to do with this video is to make the argument for why this is an extremely important part of the game, and focus in on where they are similar and how they are different, and how their differences can enrich the game a lot, whether you just play one game or whether you have decided to, in some way, distill a new game just for your table based on elements of each. So, let's start out with obligation. What is obligation? I think obligation is clearly described in Edge of the Empire, and one of the reasons why I always say read the book is that if you start at the beginning of the book and move your way through, all of these concepts are introduced, developed, and connected to related concepts as you go through your reading. So obligation is that motive force behind the character that isn't 100% drawn from inside the character. It's not their motivation. It's not their career. It's not their particular skill set or specialization. It's the sum total of their relationships up to this point. And it's not something that exists in isolation. It's not a trait that gets assigned, okay, you've got this obligation when you start play, and then everything else that goes on in play is not obligation. In fact, it's the opposite. Anytime your character needs to borrow money, needs a favor, gets connected with a criminal organization, gets hooked up with an imperial organization, so on and so forth. All of these things are obligations. They're potential hooks, pressures, weights, stressors on the character. They are things which are working on the character to make them not comfortable in their own skin, make them worry, make them make decisions, make them have to make decisions. Character doesn't have enough money. They don't want to borrow money, so they'll need to take a job. Who do they take that job from? All of these things tie into obligation. So one of our best examples of obligation in the movies is, of course, Han Solo. But when you look deeply, you can see it in more characters. Another fantastic example, maybe better than Han, is Lando. But let's take a look at duty. Because of the nature of Age of Rebellion and because of the way that duty is presented in that game, it's a little easier to see the ongoing nature of duty and how what takes place in the game has a direct effect on it. Duty is an internal motivation, but the more you feed that motivation, the more it grows. And the more it grows, the more important and the more entangled and the more dependent and codependent the character and the rebellion become. This is a really interesting idea. So it is in many ways, as I said, easier to see how this grows through play and how all the actions taken in play cause it to grow. But investigating duty shines a light back on obligation and how it also ties and binds everything together or works to pull them apart. Duty is the thing about the character that makes them valuable, makes them approachable, makes them recruitable, makes them trustable, and so on and so forth, to the Rebel Alliance. For the character, it's their viewpoint on the world. It's, in a very real sense, it's how they view the situation in the galaxy, right? To put it in very simple terms, do they see and are they focused on the need for finding and obtaining gear, starships and artillery and so on and so forth? Do they believe that the rebellion is the people and they need to sway hearts and minds? Do they value their contribution on the front line as a combatant and so on and so forth? How do they see the galaxy? How do they see their role in the galaxy in the midst of this titanic struggle between the oppression of the Empire and the realization that if we don't stop this evil now, then it will snuff the light out in the galaxy? All of these things combine and coalesce together into duty. So these two forces, obligation and duty, although very different, as we said, occupy a similar space in the game. They are an internal and external response and connection and reaction, all sourced in who the character is. On the system side, obligation and duty are checked at the beginning of a session, and this will determine what immediate and obvious mechanical effects we're going to apply to the characters as a result of this important aspect of characterization and play. So for example, obligation will place strain upon characters, whereas duty will provide a boost to their survivability. So while obligation might represent itself as worry, or tension, or bickering, and this sort of thing, direct, forceful pressure, saying, pay me now, or, duty represents that inspiration, that sense of calling, that sense of opportunity, that sense of the importance of what it is that you're doing. It's that positive influence on the character as contrasted with the negative influence of obligation. Both are pushing and pulling and surrounding and affecting the character, but in radically different ways. Now, sometimes a session will be interrupted, and one session of play will actually be split among more than one sessions of play, and it's okay not to check for obligation and duty until you finish that thing that was supposed to be one session of play. Sometimes life gets in the way, right? For example, my group was often reduced to really, really short play times, like 90 minutes or 2 hours. And so we check obligation in a 4-hour block of time or a 6-hour block of time, depending on how much is going on for that particular one thing, that one unit of things that we're doing that are affected by that role. And that's up to you, but you check at the beginning of a sequence of things, such as a session of play. If you're following through with a printed adventure and you have all of these scenes presented for you and you're moving through them in a reasonable pace, then yes, check at the beginning of every session, check at the beginning of each of the episodes, that kind of thing. Anyway, the idea is what's going through the character's mind as one of the core elements of obligation and duty. However, there's more. Both of these traits affect what is actually going to be experienced. Perhaps if you roll doubles, perhaps if you've kept rolling the same one again and again, this character's obligation activates again and again, back to back from session to session, or their duty does, or the same duty that is represented and important to multiple characters or the same obligation keeps coming up. This is a sign that this needs to be more important. This needs to be some kind of intrusion into what's happening. This means an opportunity pops up that is now going to cause a difficult decision. Do I do this, which I set out to do, which I signed a contract to do, or I'm on the mission to do, or do I veer off over here and answer the call or respond to the pressure? Right? Remember, we're playing Star Wars, and these things should always be about bringing that operatic, sweeping drama to things. The tension, the relationships, the instant friendships, the sudden attraction, the revulsion, there's still good in him, I can feel it. Moments that makes Star Wars so compelling to watch and drives us to want to get these games and play them and have those same experiences ourselves with our own characters. This is the motive force behind that. The obligation that's tormenting Han, making him say, should I stay with the rebellion? Should I go and pay off Jabba? If I don't, what's going to happen to my friends? Right? All of those ties of obligation struggling inside him. We could also look at Han as a prime example of a mixed form of play, where the character has both obligation and duty. And if you look in the Gamemaster section, you'll see a pretty good section on how to do these mixings. As you go through the line from Edge of the Empire through Age of Rebellion to Force and Destiny, you'll get more and more information about mixing these different motivations. But what is important is that as the Game Master, as the other players, and as the player of the character, you are open to how this will affect you, how it will pull on you, how it will push you, how it will twist your emotions, how it will inspire, how it will motivate, how it will challenge you to take risks, and so on and so forth. This is a core part of accepting everything that the character is. The character is more than the sum of their characteristics, of their attributes and their skills and the gear that they're carrying. They have a motivation which we take time to separate, right? And then they have these qualities that are the result of who they are and their interactions with other people. In many cases, we could think of it in old game terms as a reaction modifier. When you look in the rules, you see that obligation and duty are both described as being used as a threshold. As the group gets more and more entangled in Edge of the Empire, or as the cell becomes more and more entangled as operatives of the rebellion, things happen. People take notice. People react to them. They become too hot to deal with. They become outside elements that the Empire wants to subjugate or crush or imprison. They become legendary. They become the things that, or the people that are talked about in rumors and stories. They circulate in legend. All of these things, all of these parts of Star Wars are connected to this particular trait, this trait of obligation in Edge of the Empire and this trait of duty in Age of Rebellion. Right? What if the crime lord won't offer you a job or allow you at ridiculous loan shark rates to borrow money, or harbor you while you're on the run because you are too hot and they absolutely have no faith in your ability to complete the contract or repay the loan, or they're dead certain that people that they don't want to come looking will come looking? Right? What if you become too hot to handle? What if in Age of Rebellion, your duty has risen to such a level, your rank, your fame inside the rebellion has risen to such a level that they will do anything they can conceive of to catch you, deploying star destroyers, deploying flotillas, hiring bounty hunters, etc., 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 just to track you down. That's what this can be. Okay, so let's do a quick review. Obligation and duty are traits, both internal and external, which should help shape the nature of the session by encouraging the game master to include elements tied directly to active obligations or largely shared obligations and duties. It should encourage players to explore the emotional side of their characters beyond just their motivation, beyond the thing that intrinsically they want to do, but the things that they have to do, the things that they're called to do, the things that they feel compelled to do, the things that they think that maybe they're the only ones suited to do. This is the domain of obligation and duty. And in play, we end up with a feedback loop where obligation is rising and falling. We're working to reduce the pressure, to find some place of peace and happiness. And duty, the more that we try and ease that feeling that this is what I'm called to do, the more we are called upon to do it. It's pretty impressive for such a simple and lean mechanic. Now, there are some distinct differences here. I'm going to start with duty because it's clearer. As the group comes together, as we do with obligation, we measure how many members are in the active group, and therefore we have a cap for starting characters on what their beginning duty can be. And we're always keeping our eye on what the group duty is, and as it grows closer to 100, we're recognizing that the group is evolving in the eyes of the rebel leaders as having more and more value, being more and more effective, and in the eyes of the empire as being more and more of a problem. And every time the group crests 100, this is a momentous occasion. They may receive military rank, or they simply may receive recognition, but either way, every time they break 100 points of duty, they will be assigned a new contribution rank. This is an increasing scale. Rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, rank 4. This is an out-of-character ranking, but the idea is that it reflects the military rank or their skill as an operative inside the rebellion, outside of the rebellion's military arm. So every time that happens, duty resets to 0. So as you play through the game, as experience points are being assigned, you, the Game Master, are also assigning points of duty. You're reinforcing the character's behavior in line with the duty that they are called to serve. Right? And you can pace this along the lines of the number of experience points that you give out, but you also need to keep an eye toward the development of the campaign. Are you settling in for long-term play? Right? Did you agree that you didn't want to be rebel leaders, you wanted to be rebel operatives, and you didn't want to get into that large-scale management game? Then you need to consider keeping contribution rank, the rate at which it's accrued, slow. If, on the other hand, you wanted to mirror what you see in the films with the non-Leia characters who already starts out at a top rank in the rebellion, if you don't want to mirror that rapid and meteoric rise, right, then keep rewards low. If you do want to mirror the rapid and meteoric rise that we see in the films, then pace them with your allocation of experience points. Fantasy Flight Game Star Wars is a very well-balanced game, and as the characters receive experience points, it's very easy to ensure that challenge remains, without it seeming like they are level 1 forever. Their competence can expand and expand and expand and expand and they can dominate some encounters and still feel like they need to run away, misdirect, or somehow escape from other encounters. So that's very satisfying. But one of the things that needs to be looked at in terms of what do we really want to play is this contribution rank. And this is something that's not a part of obligation in a sense, but we'll get to that in a minute. So controlling the rise of rank inside the rebellion is one thing that you might keep at the back of your head if you don't want to reach those top limits, and really only then. Now, obligation, unlike duty, really doesn't have a cap. As it rises, you become more notorious, and that creates more and more problems. It might make you more and more interesting, more and more attractive to certain criminal leaders, but at a certain point, you are always bringing down attention, such as bounty hunters and the law and the empire and so on and so forth. Enemies, rivals, looking to take your place, take your stuff, or get revenge and that sort of thing. So, like with contribution rank, once you get up there and become famous, people know who you are, like Boba Fett, that particular moment. It's a notorious character and likely will remain notorious. But unlike contribution rank, you have ways to mitigate obligation. You can go out and fulfill your obligations. You can break up the band for a while and reduce the heat, and you can do things to pay off your debts and resolve whatever it is that's got bounty hunters after you in the first place, and so on and so forth. You can do things to remove obligation during play by what you do. Of course, that may cause taking more obligation and so on and so forth. So it's this seesaw going up and down and up and down, whereas duty basically keeps going up, which is one thing that I would like to point out. If you look carefully at Age of Rebellion and character creation, you'll notice at the beginning that you can spend experience points to buy duty down in order to gain a temporary benefit, such as experience points and so on and so forth. Well, one thing that I would propose is to keep that mechanic. There's really only one thing that's listed in character creation as only a character creation, and that's you can't raise your attributes after that point with experience. You have to do it with talents. But what if characters who do want to be a part of the rebellion but don't want to be swept away, who don't want to take all the risks, who still want to be able to try and maintain some kind of normal life for whatever reason? What if, at the cost of experience points, they could work against that buildup of duty, right? If they are trying to connect themselves to their community and separate themselves from the Rebel Alliance, this is something that you could consider to slow down that pace. If you, the players, don't want to be swept along and become leaders of the Rebel Alliance, you could consider spending your experience points to not take the duty that's being assigned to you. Just something to consider. So, obligation and duty. The last part that we need to talk about is the role of the Game Master in making all of this happen. There are not many guidelines for how to really go about it, other than character creation, and that's where I started, and that's where I recommend that you start as well. Look at the charts for buying up obligation and buying down duty, and consider those to be benchmarks for how you will approach assigning more obligation because of something, some agreement or some relationship or some debt or whatever that has come up in play in Edge of the Empire, and how much duty you're going to assign as a response and a reward for actions that have been taken. Maybe 5 points, maybe 10 points, right? Something along those lines, similar to the amount of experience might be assigned for undertaking a particular thing. So, knowing that you should, as the game master, be assigning these traits as a result of events of play. I mean, certainly not every session, certainly not as often maybe as you give experience points, but at regular points when major things happen, such as falling in with Jabba the Hutt, such as having a major battle success, or liberating a bunch of equipment from the Empire, or causing a planetary rebellion, and so on and so forth. These details matter, and they reinforce who the character is, and they connect the character to other people around them. They are the sum total of their relationships. So keep that in mind. You can put these things into play. And as these traits grow, as the obligations get bigger, specific obligations increase, as specific duty types increase, and as more and more people kind of flock to your banner under the rebellions, I want to work with those people. I want to be a part of what they're doing. Right? As that happens, then these things really do need to become more and more an influence in play. Characters appearing and reappearing, opportunities presenting themselves, opportunities being denied, right? Pressure, pressure, pressure for obligation and inspiration, opportunity, risk, sacrifice, and altruism for duty. Okay, so these tie into the core principles of keep them hungry in Edge of the Empire, right? Yes, they are working, they are making money, they're trying to make a living out there on the edge of the Empire, but things break down, things need to be replaced, things are no longer good enough. You have to eat. You have to replace gear. Things get stolen. You have to jettison your cargo between here and there because of an Imperial investigation, and so on and so forth. Things always wind up costing money. Follow the money. Make the money important. Make the relationships, make the opportunity to be able to continue to work in that area important. Keep them hungry. An obligation will take care of itself. The characters will have to take the jobs they don't want to take. They'll have to associate with the people that they don't want to associate. Or they'll have to go on these long distance trips to kind of get ahead of their reputation. And that costs credits as well. It's not about being mean. It's not about taking back what they have won. It's about actually playing that game. Keep them hungry. As for duty, the thing that I found that corresponds well with the concept of keep them hungry is keep them in doubt. Is this the time to act? Was that action we just took the right action? Have we caused more harm than good? Should we wait? Should we have a larger force before we strike? Can we trust these people who have agreed to help us? Is this the right gear? Is this the inspiration, right? The motive force of duty to try, to sacrifice, to claw, balanced out by, did I do the right thing? This, I think, is compelling play. And that brings us to the end of this particular video, looking at obligation and duty. A follow-up video on morality, corruption. And some of these concepts will be along at some point. Anyway, thanks for watching.